Good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking some time from your Sunday activities to join us for this important webinar. We are all working hard to make the constitutional amendment a reality, and we are not alone. It takes a woman to get the job done, and we are really good at cleaning up the governor's mess. Since this ban is in 16 states, a win here would energize women everywhere. I am happy to introduce our training chair, Jessica Ransom, who has been working to bring us the knowledge to succeed through her webinar programs. At this time, I am turning the program over to Jessica Ransom from Duval County.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this very informative webinar tonight. We are so glad to have you, and we know that you will gain a lot of information from this series. I would just like to take one moment to introduce the training committee who's going to help during the session. So Jean C. Benalla, Gwen Skafransky, Deborah Baker Ryan, Dawn Antonis, and myself. When we get to the presentation portion of the session today, the question and answer option will be available, and we ask you to put your questions along with your name into the Q&A panel. Do not use the chat panel. At the end of the presentation, Gwen will walk through the questions with our speaker, and she will answer as many questions as she can in the time that we have. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Jean, who's going to introduce our wonderful speaker.
Thank you, Jessica. Good evening, everyone. It's my honor to be here tonight to introduce Dr. Nancy Stotts. Dr. Stotts was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and attended public university and medical school in her home state, followed by residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. She is board certified in anesthesiology and critical care medicine and practiced medicine for 28 years before retiring and moving to Jacksonville in 2018. A lifelong advocate for health and social justice, she volunteers at Volunteers in Medicine and sits on several nonprofit boards in the Jacksonville area. The Democratic Women's Club of Florida's training committee is proud to once again introduce our speaker, Dr. Nancy Stotts. Dr. Stotts?
Thank you so much, Jean. Okay, I am going to share my slides. Can everyone see my title slide there? Just a thumbs up. Okay, correct. Great. All right. So thank you again for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. I would like to just point out on this slide, I don't see, hang on, I don't see the title coming up, but we are talking about women's health issues and women's rights and putting it on the ballot. You don't need to write down anything really other than my email address, which is up there right now, because I will make the slides completely available to anyone who would like them, along with my references. So my goals with this short presentation is to help describe the status of women's health in our country and in our area, meaning the Southeast and Florida in particular, and describe the intersection of health and health policy. Hopefully, at the end of this, you will realize there's a lot you can do, even though you're going to probably feel enraged before you feel emboldened and depressed before you're determined, but I hope you all get there. A couple of quick housekeeping things and definitions. So mortality is death, and I don't mean to be too obvious here, but it is one of the more well-studied aspects in medical research because it's unequivocal. You're either dead or you're not. Whereas morbidity, the other M that goes with M&M, is an illness or injury. We're going to be talking mostly about mortality, but please keep in mind that for every mortality incident, typically there are 5 to 10 morbidity incidents associated with that. So those are the near misses. Those are the injuries that weren't quite fatal for things like childbirth. Also, please keep in mind, pregnancy is but one time point on a person's entire lifetime. So when we focus on, for example, Black maternal mortality, we're talking about a very short time period in the prime of a person's life. And as physicians, and probably intuitively, you understand that at the extremes of age, the very young and the very old are more fragile, and we more or less anticipate a higher rate of mortality in those groups, but in the prime of one's life is particularly heartbreaking. So I'm going to go through how bad is it in our country, in our region, why it's happening, and what we can do about it. So here is the US compared to other industrialized nations. Many of you may have seen this slide in other forms in other places. At 23.8, that's how maternal mortality is reported. It's per 100,000 live births. The reason we do that is if you get into the percentage, it's quite low. You get a lot of zeros and it's hard to compare. But suffice it to say, compared to France, we're almost 3 times worse. Compared to the UK, almost 4 times worse. When you get down to Norway and Sweden, we're more than 10 times worse in our overall maternal mortality. This is for all maternal mortality, not Black maternal mortality. That number is 10 times worse than those other countries. Unless you think, I don't want you to get the impression these are just the rich European countries that have longstanding socialized medicine. In fact, this list shows you how many countries have better, lower maternal mortality rates than we do. Looking through here, you see many countries that are shockingly poor. Slovenia, Slovakia, Kuwait, Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania, etc. Even Russia has only 14 maternal deaths per 100,000 births. So they're doing way better than we are. And then you have to get down to Malaysia, Lebanon, Grenada, etc., before you get into the realms of the low 20s, which is where we're sitting currently. What's really distressing, though, is, and this is older data, it starts from 2018 through 2020. Data is slow to come in, folks, so I apologize up front, but we sometimes can only look backwards. But back in 2018, we were around 17, 18 deaths per 100,000. We are now climbed up to 23.8. And as you can see from this graph, the US is that top number, that top line. We're the only country doing significantly worse over time. So not only did we start out worse, we're doing a lot worse over time. Sorry. Now, what's really distressing is when you look at that overall mortality rate and you compare it to by race, and you can see that Black maternal mortality at 55 is way higher than the either Hispanic or white maternal mortality. So there is an uneven burden being borne by Black mothers, and we need to figure out why. I have some theories. No one knows for sure, but there are a multitude of factors happening concurrently. This graph, again, shows back in 2018 when we had 17.4 for our average. We're now jumped to 23.8. And again, Black maternal mortality has gone up significantly more. So the knee-jerk reaction from some in the community is, well, there may be more disease in the Black population. And while there is a correlation between underlying medical problems and maternal mortality, I hope you have been paying attention to the news and understand that even Black women in the prime of their life, in peak physical condition, are dying. So Tori Bowie, probably not a household name, but she was on a 4-woman relay team in the Olympics and won a gold medal some years back, I think about 10 or 12 years back. She unfortunately died last month. She lived in Florida. She died last month in the 8th month of pregnancy. Her child did not make it. She did not make it. She probably developed preeclampsia and eclampsia and was found dead at home at age 32. What's even more distressing about her story is that 2 other of the 4 women on her team also suffered near-death experiences during childbirth, which is just should be astonishing. These are premier athletes. Another example is Serena Williams. Maybe some of you recall that story, but after she was forced to have a C-section after developing some fetal bradycardia, the day after her C-section, she developed shortness of breath. She had clots in her legs. She had to start an anticoagulant. She started bleeding from her surgery. She ended up fine, but she had to really strongly advocate for herself and would not take no for an answer, which is why she's still alive. But again, this is a person in the prime of her life in peak physical condition. So what's the numbers? These numbers I've been telling you, 55, 19, 23, what does it mean in terms of actual numbers? So in 2020, there were 861 women who died in the perinatal period, and that includes up to 6 weeks post delivery. And that doesn't sound like a huge number, but just remember, each of these is a woman in the prime of her life, often with other young children, and the impact that's having on our communities. And just for comparison, in 2021, the infant deaths numbered close to 20,000. The number there is 543 per 100,000 live births. And each of these represent a family who is suffering tremendous grief. And mothers and families never get over these kinds of losses. So I'd like you to just listen to one woman, Ms. Kimberly Novad, listen to her story.
I'm going to have a baby. I never once thought that I would not have that baby, you know? And, you know, when so my son was born prematurely and he passed shortly after his birth. He was about a month old. And he had a stage 4 brain bleed. And so, you know, most babies, when they get the brain bleed, they get better. But my son didn't get better. And I had to come to terms with that not only was I not going to bring him home, but that my entire vision and dream for what my family would be, it was over. And that was really, really hard for me to accept. It's been now 7.5 years. I'm not over it. And people don't get over it, you know? No. And so I think that, you know, this life lesson has given me the opportunity to understand that, one, this is a experience where somebody has one foot in the grave, right? Birth is so close to death. It's this transition, right? My baby came from another world to join me here in this world. And he couldn't stay. But right? But because he lived, I was able to open my mind to the fact that I'm not the only one. When you go through the experience, it's very isolating. It feels like you're the only one. I blamed myself. I blamed my body. I thought if I could have did more, you know. But ultimately, I had to accept that I'm his mother. If there was more I could have done, I would have done it. Right. Yes. I would have given my life for him. Sure. It was not the chance. It was not the opportunity I was given. And so when he died, I was so lost. And the more I learned about how many other women in my community were having this experience, right? I didn't even think about, the women who had died, because that wasn't my experience.
Right.
I just started learning about all the babies who had died.
Mhm.
And that did not sit well with me. How many people in our communities right now are missing because of preterm birth, because of infant mortality? Wow. These babies are our future. Who could they be?
Pretty powerful, right? And so when we talk about numbers in the thousands or, the tens of thousands, it's a huge impact, on our communities. We can't underestimate that. So this map, I'm going to start a little geography here, but bear with me because I'm really looking for big pictures here when we look at our country. This is a map of maternal mortality. It's older data, so it's not as high in numbers, but the trend line is the important part, where the worst states for maternal mortality are concentrated in the southeast part of our country. I think we could all agree looking at that map. I'm going to now look at a couple of other maps. One looks at infant mortality and the other looks at regular mortality, which we call life expectancy. It's a little more positive than mortality, right? So infant mortality, again, there's a large concentration of the dark orange and red in the southeast, some in the Midwest. And then in the other map, hopefully you all can see the lower part of our country has the worst in terms of life expectancy. Louisiana, Mississippi. Mississippi actually has the lowest life expectancy at 71.9, Hawaii the highest at 80.9. Now this map really jumps out. And the reason is, instead of looking at an entire state, which a state like Florida is really a tale of two states, this looks at census tract information. So it's more by zip code or county level data. And this shows life expectancy at birth in the US. And the red is bad. The red is where life expectancy is shortest. And as you can see, that northern half of Florida is very similar to Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, Georgia, West Virginia. And then also it's bad out west. Those are mostly Native American states where you see the large red patches there. So it's a sad testimony to what being treated poorly does to people, frankly. And just to drive this final point home, this is the Department of Health's data from 2021. And looking at life expectancy, if you look at three main counties for comparison, Collier, Miami-Dade, and Duval. Collier has Naples, Florida, a lot of retirees. Miami-Dade also has retirees, and then Duval. And the average life expectancy has a variation of more than 10 years. So it's 84.7 years in Collier versus 74.5 in Duval. Now, some of this is a statistical aberration because when people retire and move somewhere and they're already in their 60s, they're more likely to live longer. But the point is well taken that North Florida behaves more like a southern state. Medicaid expansion, something near and dear to my heart. The good news is we're down to 10 states that have not expanded Medicaid. North Carolina recently did vote to go ahead and do that. So once again, we see a concentration of the Southeast plus Texas, and then a few aberrant states in the Midwest. And Medicaid, by not expanding Medicaid, there's the obvious downfall of not having medical care available to people. But in addition, what's probably even more important is medical debt, because when you don't have insurance just one illness, one major injury can put you in serious medical debt. And we see that in this map, which shows, again, in the Southeast and Texas, a concentration where counties have more than 40% of their population in significant medical debt. This is another way of looking at that similar data back in 2014, when Obamacare was starting to be formed, and we had Marketplace, and we had the offer of expanding Medicaid at 90% payment. States could either expand, not expand, or expand late. And depending on what they did, as you can see, those that never expanded have the highest form of debt. And this is data through JAMA and the New York Times. This, other than Georgia, sweet Georgia, again, not every red state has not expanded Medicaid, but many of them who did had it through citizen referendums. So you cannot deny the fact that Republican administrations have resisted expanding Medicaid over the years, and that is a direct reflection in the earlier maps that I showed. So why, getting back to the Black maternal mortality problem, why are women dying at such higher rates? Well, there are underlying conditions, including obesity, hypertension, and type 2 diabetes. But when you look at the foreign-born advantage, so-called, where if you take Black women who were not born in the US, but just come to the US to deliver, they do much better. They're more like white women in terms of their outcomes than women born in the US. And rather than calling it a foreign-born advantage, I would say it's a US-born disadvantage. There is, of course, a relationship between either poor quality prenatal care or a short duration of it. And then C-section rates also increase risks. And Florida, not surprisingly, has the third highest rate of C-sections after Mississippi and Louisiana. The other social determinants of health, food, housing, air, water pollution, job opportunities that allow you to go to the doctor, all of those influence your health as well. And mental health is becoming more and more significant. And although generally speaking, we have this positive correlation between increased wealth and education and decreased complication, that does not hold true fully in the case of Black US women, because even a wealthy, well-educated Black woman has a much higher mortality rate than a white woman with no high school education. So abortion, this is a very timely topic. As Jessica alluded to, we are going to be talking more and more about it. And basically, this map is not really correct. I think Florida should be a very dark orange and represent very restricted, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And keep in mind, we have a 6-week abortion ban in the hopper. As soon as the court decides on the 15-week, that will go into effect 30 days later. So we are on the precipice of turning dark maroon and joining all these other states with their very high mortality rates and their very high infant mortality rates as well. Why do I call Florida restrictive? Well, one is because we have a 15-week abortion ban. And there might be some among you who might say, well, gosh, it's better than a 6-week ban, isn't it, Doc? And so here's where I find it particularly heartbreaking, the 15-week ban, because nowadays you have a 4D ultrasound done to detect fetal anomalies somewhere between 18 and 20 weeks, because the organs are still forming prior to that. So there's no point in doing it before then. So now patients who are given this horribly tragic news now have to figure out a way to get out of Florida and have either the pregnancy terminated or deal with it, however they're going to deal with it. So it's just a double burden, and some people cannot afford to leave the state. In addition, patients in Florida have to make 2 separate trips in person for counseling in order to schedule an abortion. There is no other procedure that requires that, to my knowledge. State Medicaid doesn't cover the procedure in most cases. And for girls, 17 years of age and under, they must have notarized parental consent and give them notice that they're having an abortion. In addition, in Florida, they only allow physicians to provide either a surgical abortion or the medication abortion, which is used in about half the cases. So nurse practitioners and PAs who are often allowed to do this in other states cannot do that in Florida, even though Florida has among the laxest paraprofessional laws of any state. So it is truly ironic. And finally, just to top it off, they have these trap laws, which are basically onerous things that abortion clinics have to follow and paperwork so that they can easily slip up and be shut down. So yeah, we've got it all here in Florida, really. One of the unintended consequences of these new bans, the 6-week ban in particular, is that those states that have enacted them have seen a 10.5% drop in residency applications for OBGYN in 2023 from the previous year. That's over 10% in 1 year. That is a lot. And it's already difficult to fill OBGYN programs because, let's face it, it's a tough lifestyle. You have an 18-year statute of limitations for lawsuits, and their pay really is not commensurate for the risks and the med mal that they pay. So this doctor was quoted as saying, when you're in a blue state, you give her all the options, but in a red state, I'm like, sorry, there's nothing more we can do. And it's heartbreaking to me as a physician to hear that doctors have to worry about losing their license. Of course, doctors care about patients, but they also can't go to jail. They're not going to treat any patients, and they can't lose their license either. So doctors have been put in an untenable, horrible situation, and they are leaving these states. That first of all, they're not coming in, but the ones who are here are also leaving. So some takeaways from all this information for me, this is what sort of stands out, is that it is racism. It's not race. It's not wealth. It's not education. It's not even access, because of the reasons we've talked about. Several variables, however, on a positive note, there are several variables under our control, like early prenatal care, expanding healthcare to all our citizens, trying to get advocacy during pregnancy and delivery, expansion of things like Black doulas, Black midwives, that would help. Also, the Commonwealth Fund did an analysis of all the maternal deaths, and many times it's missed or delayed opportunities for treatment is the cause. And if we were to recognize the problem earlier, we could save lives. There's nothing about the doctors in Europe, for example, other than the socialized medicine, which gives better access, but there's nothing about the training there that should make them 10 times better at saving lives, right? It's that physicians and other healthcare providers are not acknowledging the symptoms and signs and complaints, mostly of Black women. That's really what's happening, but we could get better. There is an opportunity for that. And finally, the take home is that all of these mortality rates and morbidity rates and your quality of life really depend very heavily on where you live and who makes decisions about your life. And I don't mean let's all move to Hawaii. I mean, let's make a state that has bad people in charge making bad decisions about our quality of life, and let's change that. So what can be done realistically? And I don't know about realistically. So Medicaid expansion in Florida, we know that's not going anywhere real soon, but we have to hope. We have to keep trying. We have to keep trying to elect people who believe in the principle of Medicaid expansion, that healthcare is a right. We need to support more training of Black doulas and midwives who can advocate for Black mothers to decrease their C-section rates and improve outcomes. Knowledge is power, and you need an advocate. For very appropriate candidates, and I would call them low-risk birth opportunities, birthing centers can be very appropriate. There's less surgical intervention there. And we could all become more, informed about some of the experiences of Black and brown mothers. There is a story about Dr. Shalon Irving that's very moving. She worked for the NIH and unfortunately died shortly after the birth of a much wanted child. At the recommendation of a friend, I can also highly recommend the movie Aftershock on Netflix, which is a documentary of 2 Black moms who died in the perinatal period, both well educated and well cared for at home and healthy. And we need to talk about mental health and, try to, among all of us, say it's okay. The baby blues, it's more than that. Sometimes you need to seek help and get help. Other things are local programs and national programs. Locally, Planned Parenthood does a phenomenal job. And then, of course, Floridians Protecting Freedom, FPF, they are the main organizer and funder of the petition program that's going on right now. And so I myself recently started giving to them monthly, because while they're continuing to get petitions monthly, they need to be funded monthly. They're paying for paid petitioners. It helps for us to do it, but they need to be able to pay those folks too. So until we hit our 1 million petitions, I'm giving every month. And I know not everybody is able to do that, but if you are, it would be very appreciated. The top 3 organizations are at the national level, and feel free to check them out. They're very, very interesting and are doing great work. And finally, vote. Your vote is your voice. We need to speak up and speak out and say enough is enough with this. We need pro-choice legislators and pro-choice legislation. We know that when this future abortion limit goes into place, it's going to result in even worse outcomes, and it's going to disproportionately affect Black women. So unfortunately, we've got some tough road ahead of us. Now, a lot of these things seem kind of long-term pie in the sky. And a lot of you want to do something right now. You're angry. I love it. One big thing is to help with the petitions, and hopefully Jessica may go into more details on that. But you can gather petitions from anyone who is a registered voter in the state of Florida. It doesn't matter their party. I've been doing this now for a couple of months. I have to tell you, no party affiliate, Republicans, Democrats, this is popular. This is giving women the right to vote on this, giving all of us the right to vote to do this. Otherwise, a person in the legislature who's never, frankly, usually never even experienced a menstrual period is deciding that you need to carry your pregnancy to term and give it up for adoption, or whatever in their mind is the right solution. That doesn't work for everybody. I understand for some people, abortion is not an option, but let people decide. Trust women. You can also contact local abortion providers. Planned Parenthood is always good, and they're throughout Florida. A Woman's Choice is just here in Jacksonville. Please beware of the fake clinics, folks, because they masquerade as clinics, but they don't have doctors. They don't do procedures. They don't offer abortion services at all. They're basically staffed by, volunteers from the hard right who want to encourage patients not to have abortions. But those clinics need dollars, of course, but they also need patient escorts and just people advocating for them in the community. Next thing is to get folks registered to vote, because you can't sign the petition until you're registered to vote. So get out there and register, folks. If you've been looking for a reason why, here it is. And if you tell me it doesn't matter who it is, oh yeah, it does. And let me show you some maps, and I'll tell you, it really does matter who's in charge. It matters for your life and the life of everybody you care about. So consider people who have been historically disinterested, people who are new to the area, some college students, high school students, even if they're over 16, can still register. If you have a returning citizen, I encourage you to send them to the FRRC, because the last thing we want to do is get someone in trouble with trying to register to vote who may not meet all the criteria, and FRRC provides free service on that. Hopefully most of y'all are familiar with that. Talk to folks about the impending 6-week ban and why it's bad and how it harms babies and families and mothers who already have other children. And that is going to harm our future, our children and grandchildren, because we're not going to have obstetricians in our state. And then again, just a final vote, vote, vote. You all are going to vote or you wouldn't be on this call. But what I would encourage you to do is think about how to talk to folks who may not be registered Democrats and start the conversation about, what do you think about this ban? Did you know they're trying to put it on the ballot to let us decide? Do you want the legislators to decide or should the people decide? When the people of Florida are given a voice, they are good. They make the right decisions, just like they did with the returning citizens. You know, unfortunately, it got mucked up in the final, iteration. But we Floridians will do the right thing, and this is hugely popular. So the take home is that this is all about control. It's about controlling our bodies, our health, our families, our rights, whether you're pregnant or not pregnant. Women are the backbone of our workforce, and women are the majority. We are 51% of the population and even more of voters. So vote like a mother, vote like your life depends on it, because it does. And I'd like to end with a short 2-minute video that I'll pull up here in just a second. It is from 2017, so it's slightly dated. You'll know the situation. And what I love about it is it shows that there is a lot of unity on these issues out there. And all the people who participated in this initial video are at least as upset now as they were then. We can't march in the streets for 5 years in a row, but I think this bodes well for 2024, hopefully.
Hi, my name is Elise Fox, model, mom, and entrepreneur based in New York. I started my company, Sad Girls Club, on Squarespace in 2017 after using my passion for film.
Sorry about that.
Know your place. Shut up and smile.
Nancy, not showing.
Together, we are a movement and we are unstoppable. Transgender person and we're lead to making history as we from African Americans. It's radicalized the notion of masculine. Let's talk about some of the stories. And this is a day that will change us forever because we are together.
The trauma from the things that I experience has been an everyday struggle. Every time I walk outside.
Okay, with that, I would be happy to take any questions that.
Okay, Dr. Stats, I think we're ready for you. We've got 6 questions waiting here. Joy Burgess says, how can we better inform our voting population in Duval, especially Black and brown women and their families, that voting and who they vote for really matters?
I mean, that is the $1 million question, isn't it? education, I think getting into the community when there's a tragedy, or even when there isn't, just to explain to people that you have a higher risk to give birth, and it doesn't have to be this way.
Okay. All right. Lori Frisch makes a comment. So I'll read the comment and maybe you can expand on it. Lori says, yes, it is racism, but what this is really about is controlling women. This is where white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, and all women come together. So do you think, all of these regulations is trying to control?
Absolutely. I think one of my last slides actually used that word, that this is legislators attempting to control all of us, not just Black women, and not just women for that matter. They want to control poor people writ large by immigration laws. They want to control immigrants by immigration laws. They want to control poor people by not expanding Medicaid. They want to control unions by not allowing them to exist. So at every turn, this is about a small group of people trying to exert an inordinate amount of control over everyone else. Based on, what's crazy is it's not based on anything that is organic or wanted. It's based on a 1950s sort of manifesto that is just, it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling.
Absolutely. Beverly Wall asked, it says, oh no, that was a suggestion about the last. Okay, let's see. Okay, Glorious Johnson says, is there a midwife group here in Jacksonville? Do you know whether there is?
There are several midwives in Jacksonville. There is only one Black midwife in Jacksonville, which is not, good, but, and I am blanking on her name. I had her as a panelist when I went to JU recently to do a talk, but it's called Crowning, I think is the name of her birthing center. But you can Google, there's probably 5 or 6 midwives in Duval County, which for the size of our county is really not a lot. So again, this is something that, it'd be great if our local doctors, nurses, even whether you're an OBGYN or a family physician, to just have literature in your waiting room about the idea that having a doula as a support person during pregnancy and childbirth has been shown to decrease complications, and having someone to advocate for you. People don't have sometimes the courage to stand up to that machine that is, US healthcare. And I know, even as a physician, trying to advocate for my mother at one point and coming up against surgeons wanting this and that. And, it's very difficult. So it's completely understandable that they need some help. And this would help. And of course, having more Black representation among our physicians and all these other paraprofessionals. But, with recent Supreme Court decisions, it's concerning how that is going to come about. But that would be also good. We need DEI, we need all of these programs, because when we eliminate that, that's our conscious bias. That's how we have to get over that, is to learn about it. We must be pushing for this.
I see. Ann Osieka asks, how can we get the copies of the petition and who to return them to?
I'm glad you asked. That's a great question. Was that the full question?
Yes.
Okay. So if you go to the Floridians Protecting Freedom website, you can click on, if you have the ability to print, you can print as many as you'd like. If printing costs are an issue, I know of a couple people locally here, if you're here, that could help, but it's really just the cost of printing. You could take it to Kinko's or whatever. And each petition, so there's nothing magic about it. Once you have one, you can just make copies of that, wherever, go to work. But the thing about it that's important is it's in the middle part of this document that needs to be filled out. They have the last name first, then the first name, and then the middle name. I highly recommend that they put all 3 names, because it's supposed to match what's in the supervisor of elections voter registration record for you. So even though you have the first and last name and your date of birth, you would think it would be enough. But if you are Jessica Ann Ransom and you just put Jessica Ransom, there's a small chance, depending on your SOE, that they could say, this isn't a full match. I don't have to accept this petition. The other thing is you need the date of birth. It needs to be legible. It needs to be signed. And it needs to have the correct county with no abbreviations. And then it needs to be turned in to the SOE technically by 30 days. But what we need to do is by 10 days, get it to the hub. So there's multiple hubs throughout the state that you can directly drive and drop off, or if it's none of them are convenient for you, just make sure you mail them to the address that's right on the petition, within a week, I would say, because what they have to do is go through and make sure there's no mistakes. Sometimes that can be corrected, that they can go back to someone. When you turn it in a bunch of them, you're supposed to put a cover sheet that says, I'm the one who got these. And then if there's a problem, they'll come back to you and ask you, can you get this person to re-sign it because I can't read their signature or whatever. So that's how it goes. So there is a time limit. Remember, they're looking for any reason to kick that out because they don't want us to do this.
Right. Thank you. Joy Burgess says Senator Booker and Representative Underwood and Adams have reintroduced the Black maternal health omnibus. Yeah, she has I think she meant act recently. How can we get more information about this legislation and ways we can support its passage?
Well, there's lots of information on the Momnibus online. It's a work in progress. So it includes things like early childhood education, childcare, maternal leave. Oh my gosh, can you imagine maternal and paternal leave like in other countries? How excellent would that be? Do you think that might help us out some? But so there's lots of information as far as getting it passed. Right now, the House is, it's just not likely that it's going to make much traction realistically. And I don't like to be negative, but I am kind of realistic too. I like to be a truth teller. And I think that until we make some changes in 2024, which I am hopeful for, we should get a more favorable House and Senate even to help get things like this passed, because that's what we need.
Absolutely. Pat Beerhalter says Rachel Maddow's podcast, Deja News, of this past week reports on Polish politics that look like precursor to US. 7 women have died under abortion total bans. Women are protesting. The podcast is worth a listen. So I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah, I listened to her. If you have time to listen to the first one that she did, I'm blanking on the name if anybody knows, but it basically looked at older history and how it's repeating itself in terms of white nationalism. And it's jaw-dropping. It's absolutely jaw-dropping. The parallels to what's going on now is, we are on the brink. We were on the brink just before World War II. We were on the brink. We were infiltrated. This isn't conspiracy theories. There were Nazi sympathizers in our government, and we escaped that, but it was narrow, and we're looking at something similar now. So I think she's fantastic. I would recommend any of her podcasts, really.
Gloria Einstein asks, is there any downside to asking people to sign the abortion petition and the clean water petition at the same time?
I don't see a downside.
No.
Nope.
We need to advocate for both.
Yeah. So the problem with the clean water petition, which I've signed and I'm going to have copies of at an upcoming event, but they just don't have the funding. The abortion issue is, when I tell you it's extremely unpopular, it's extremely. So they're getting money from all over the country. They're getting money from donors here. And so what that's allowing them to do is go out and get petitions. Now, I'm not going to tell you my source, but I recently heard from a reliable person that we have over 500,000 petitions already, which that means in 2 months, we started on May 22nd. We have over that. So we are probably definitely going to hit our numbers as long as they can keep going with the funding. And that's really the big question, because some of it is starting to get a little tighter. But I have every reason to believe this will be on the ballot in 2024, and it is going to drive up the electorate the way we want it to be. So it is kind of a blessing in an odd way.
Right. Ann Richter says, is there a reason you are not supporting Florida's Healthy Start programs?
No, I absolutely support Healthy Start.
Okay.
That wasn't meant to that wasn't an intentional omission. I was really more talking broadly about, maternal mortality, but in my coalition supports, I should have included them because they do fantastic work.
Mm-hmm. I think this is refers to the petitions. If we mail it to main office, then how do I know it will arrive in a week? Asked Karen Salver. I think she means, if we mail the petition.
Right. So, so from the date that it was signed, say you get a group of your friends over a week and you have 10 petitions, try to get the latest one, in the mail by that 1 week mark, so that by 10 days to 2 weeks, it will be at the main hub, and that will give them plenty of time, another 2 weeks to get it to the supervisor of election. Because remember, occasionally, especially when I'm out in a public venue, I get people from different counties. And so the hub has to then send it to the appropriate county. So they really need a couple of weeks to do their side of it. So we have about 7 to 10 days to get it out and into their hands, is the way I would look at it. So you just don't, once you get them, it's great to get them, but don't sit on them too long, because then people think they've signed it and they really haven't been counted. And that's the worst kind of situation.
Okay. All right, thank you. Joy Burgess has a piece of information. She says Alexis Gaines from Duval is a doula and works with many pregnant women at UF Shands in Jacksonville. She can be reached at successforlife88@gmail.com. I'm going to copy that, and maybe we can send that out somehow.
That's great information. Thank you, Joy.
Okay. And then let's see. Ann Oseka asks, how do we find the hubs to return petitions to? Is that more a question for Jessica or Jean?
If you go on the Floridians Protecting Freedom site,
Okay.
the beautiful site, it's got everything right there. You just click on hubs and it literally gives you a map of Florida. You can zoom in and see which one is close to you.
Okay, we're getting close to 8 o'clock here, so I'm going to read this. Mary McIntyre posted this. I'm not sure there's a question buried in here, but I'll read it anyway. She says, I have a friend who is Black, obese, had gestational diabetes. She was treated horribly in 2 different prestigious hospitals. An example was how she was treated in the operating theater when nurses and doctors both talked among themselves, thinking she was totally under sedation. The things they said were awful, and she was given no interest when she attempted to be her own advocate. My point, Hospital staffs themselves need to be trained in the care of patients who may not fall into the categories of hospital/surgical/nursing employees. So I think we can all agree it's always good to have an advocate there. If I have to go in the hospital, I take my daughter with me, and she can scare anybody. Let's see. Another one from Ann Oseka. Will you email us the slides of this presentation?
Well, I'm going to email them to Jessica and then ask her to do it.
Okay, and then finally, Anna's really here. She has another one here. Could you please send the name of this podcast?
Oh, you're talking about the first one that I was talking about that Rachel Maddow did, or?
It's not clear.
Okay, hang on, I can find it. So I know the second one she did is called Deja News, and it's other topics. And that was the one that covers the situation in Poland where they had a total abortion ban, and now there's problems. Let's see, but the original, it's called Ultra is the first one.
Ultra. Okay, thank you. That's the just about the end. Let me see. Oh, wait a minute. Andrea Williams says she said I think she was answering Anna's question. She said it is Bagman Podcast, and then Kim says Ultra. So now I have one question for you, Doctor. I have 3 daughters who all gave birth. 2 of them had C-sections. One I could understand because it was, my daughter's had been on bed rest, and her organs were actually shutting down. They had to rush her in but the other daughter, I never understood why she had to have a cesarean. Why are so many cesareans done in the United States? I don't understand that, especially, when I was in, the childbearing age, there was more natural childbirth being pushed and all of this type of thing. I don't think our numbers were as bad,
Definitely
40 or 50 years ago.
They've gone up. It's about 1 in 3 women end up with a C-section, again, higher in minorities. So what things predispose to C-sections? Things like twins and complications, eclampsia, those sorts of things, bleeding disorders, HELLP syndrome, large gestational age, or any other, problem that mom or baby is having. But by and large, the 2 big things that the obstetrician writes down before he says, okay, we're taking you back for the C-section, is either failure to progress, which means the cervix isn't dilating beyond, say, whatever the mark is, 8 centimeters over multiple hours, multiple checks. And then the other one is fetal distress, and that's the much more common one. Mm-hmm. And, back in your day, probably they didn't, and my day, honestly, they weren't monitoring the baby quite as, second to second as they do now. And so when the baby shows the least little bradycardia, there's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, we've got to get baby out, baby could be in distress. That's a bit of a judgment call. It's normal to have bradycardia as the head is squeezed. So some of that is natural and some of that would be just fine. The unfortunate truth, and I'm not giving them excuses, is that if there is a problem and you haven't done a cesarean and there's the evidence of bradycardia, then there could be a lawsuit. And, so there is a little bit of what we call defensive medicine happening. It's the same reason everybody with the worst headache of their life gets a CT scan now in the ER. That didn't used to happen either. You use clinical judgment, exam, and so on. So, by and large, I really think it's more that physicians are anxious to just have it over with and get the baby out and go home.
Mhm.
But the other big thing is the payment that the way it works, the hospital gets about double to triple for a C-section as it gets for a vaginal delivery. And that makes no sense because you're in the OR for 45 minutes and you're done. Whereas a vaginal delivery can take days, literally, of manpower and so on. So right now, it's a fault of our system. Our healthcare system is too focused on procedures, and that's how we pay hospitals and we pay physicians. And unfortunately, it's led to me, what's the word I want, kind of overutilization of, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it.
Right. But the one that I felt didn't need the cesarean, but I mean, there were so many things hooked up to her that, and to the monitoring this and monitoring that. So I tend to agree with you. Thank you so much. That was so informative. That's the end of our questions. So I'm going to turn this over now to Jessica. Thank you, Doctor. Jessica, I think you're muted. Can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, I was on my phone. Oh, I'm getting backlash.
Mhm. Sparagram has raised hand. Can see your message. Okay. Yes, raised hand.
Mary,
Okay.
Yes,
can you hear me?
yes.
Can you launch the poll? Can y'all hear me now? I was getting some kind of terrible feedback. Okay. All right. I want to thank Dr. Nancy Stats first for a wonderful presentation and for all the information she gave us tonight. Few questions that came up. We will be sending out the presentation to anyone who was on the call who wants to get the presentation. The recording will go up on our YouTube, DWCF YouTube website in a couple of days. And when it's up, we will also send a message out and let you know. In the meantime, we have a 2-question poll just to get some feedback. And then I'm going to turn it over to President Forte Namouche to wrap us up. So bear with us a couple more minutes. We just want to get some information from you about the content of the presentation. Okay, can everybody see the poll? All right, just 2 questions. I'll give you a few minutes. All right, Mary, you want to wrap us up and then I'll get the results of the poll, okay?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to thank Dr. Stats for this informative program. It was really good. And thank you, Jessica, and the DWCF Training Committee for another successful evening. Our next webinar is Sunday, August 6th at 7 p.m. And I believe it's the demographics and equity in Florida. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Oh, that's going to be fabulous. Please put this on your calendar and don't miss it. The schedule for the training webinars can be found on our website. And just wanted to mention that the questions about petitions and where the hubs are all on the website. Also reach out to your state, your county president, your club president, because almost all our clubs are now involved and they're well aware of how to do this. I just want to thank you for coming and enjoying the rest of the evening.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share the results of the poll. And once again, we appreciate everyone. We know everybody's busy and a lot's going on, but this is very important work. And this information, we hope we can use to help to empower and engage our people so they can have a good understanding about what is at stake. And when we see these numbers, it's heartbreaking, you know, and so sometimes we just got to put a face to the problem so people will understand what it is, because a lot of times is people are detached from a situation because it doesn't concern you, right? You don't have that situation. But anytime that someone gets pregnant, they could find themselves in a horrible situation because of the rules that these laws are passing. So people have to understand it may not impact you at the moment, but it could impact you or someone you love pretty significantly very fast. And so we, being women, you know, we have to do our best to communicate to our circle of influence, because that's where we can really impact, is our family and our friends. And so that's what we're asking everybody to do, is make sure that you are touching at least your family and your people of influence around you about these important issues. And once again, Dr. Stats, thank you so much, because she is a very passionate supporter and champion for this issue. And thank you for your time sharing with us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that wraps us up. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your night.